We've already looked at every single human vehicle, both in the Halo games and even vehicles that were cut from the Halo games. And with the Halo franchise spanning over 2 decades, there's a lot of really awesome vehicles that we've seen. But what about on the other side of things? What vehicles have the Covenant used over the years, and how has that evolved and changed? Well, today we're going to be taking a closer look here, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, way back at the very beginning, Halo Combat Evolved started off as a RTS type game, and while all the way back then there weren't really the Covenant per se, there were some alien vehicles, and occasionally these aliens would have tanks that kind of looked like this, and after some later revisions to this tank, it would become the famous Covenant Purple, which later would be the Wraiths that we would see down the road. There was also this fighter pod thing that kind of looked like the STAPs from Star Wars Episode 1 that the droid army uses. And then later on during the development of what would become Halo Combat Evolved, some other vehicles were thought of and conceptualized, like the Covenant Bomber, which was supposed to be like another version of a Banshee that would have a cannon on each side and shoot some sort of bombs. There were ideas for Covenant Ground Transport, which probably became the Shadow in Halo 2. And then there was a vehicle that originally was supposed to be called a Shadow. However, it ended up getting cut, and it seems like this idea was later used again in Halo 2, but of the Spectre, which we'll get into in a little bit. So by the time that Halo Combat Evolved officially released, we saw the debut of just a couple of Covenant vehicles that made it into the final publication of the game. We had the Ghost, which back in the Combat Evolved days did not have a boost, and it kind of just glided around, but it still was a fun vehicle to drive. Then there was the Banshee, which I always thought was a really clever name because it screams loud as you fly it around from the engine. I thought that was kind of a play on the idea of a screaming Banshee. And then of course there were the Wraiths that were in Combat Evolved, though at this time in the Halo franchise they weren't drivable just yet, but they were an interesting adversary to have to face against. Then they had the Covenant dropships and Covenant cruisers. Covenant dropships were called Spirits in this game. We could never pilot them, but they were there. After Halo Combat Evolved's release, there were a lot of vehicles that were considered to be brought in for the follow-up game in Halo 2. We know that there's concept art for something called a Brute Cycle, which probably would later be brought back as the Brute Chopper, and the Brute Cycle honestly doesn't sound as intimidating. There was also supposedly a vehicle known as a Covenant Fuel Truck, which we have no idea what that would have been or how that would have been incorporated into part of the game. We don't even know if we'd be able to drive it, but it does sound interesting nonetheless. And there's another vehicle known as the Command Shuttle, which could be seen in some storyboards for the level The Arbiter, and it would have had been some kind of giant dropship, kind of like a Lich in Halo 4. There was also ideas to possibly have different types of Ghost variations known as the Excavation, the VTOL, and the Special Forces Ghost, though we don't really know too much about that. So when Halo 2 officially released, the Ghost and the Banshee were brought back from Halo 1. The Ghost and the Banshee also both got boosts, and in general the physics engine in Halo 2 just felt a lot better when it came to vehicles. Now the Wraith was drivable, and it was pretty hefty and a little challenging to take out. It was a 2-seater with a turret and an actual tank shot available. And then of course the good old Spectre was introduced, one of the greatest Halo vehicles of all time, and to this day we still wish it would be included in a future Halo title. This baby was cooler than the Warthog because it could fit 4 players at the same time, not just 3, and they could all cruise together, and that was really cool. This also marked the debut of the Phantom. We also saw some interesting things like the Heretic Banshees show up on some levels, which were mostly just regular Banshees, but they had a different Heretic skin.
Hey yo, also real quick, I think Elijah forgot to talk about the Shadow, which got cut, but it got as far as like it's restored in mod form right now, and you can actually drive it, and there's 2 versions of it, like a troop carrier versions with like seats, and then like the one you see in game with the ghosts under it. And also we saw the Scarab for the first time, which obviously you can't drive, but you can board it.
Now we didn't talk about this as much in the previous video on Halo 2, but in Halo 2, if you do some glitching known as arbitrary unit possession, you can actually do some stuff in co-op. It involves like dying and doing some stuff at the spawn and then loading in a certain number of objects that can allow you to respawn as a vehicle, which means you can pilot some vehicles that you weren't originally supposed to do. So all of a sudden you can just like be a phantom if you wanted to, if you knew how to do it. And that's kind of cool. Just something that kind of predates some of the earlier things. Now, when we look at cut content in Halo 3, we know that there wasn't too much as far as what the Covenant would have that didn't make it into the game, but there was this interesting Mantis Walker type shade turret hybrid that would have been this interesting little thing we got to drive around with legs. I love that the modding community has taken this idea and has ran with it a little bit, but it's a really cool concept. Now, from Halo 2, the Ghost, Banshee, and Wraith made a return. They were refined a little bit better. The Banshee this time was interesting because you could shoot and fire your bombs at the same time, though the Spartan driving the Banshee would be a little more visible, making them more vulnerable than in previous titles. There was the anti-AA Wraith, which wasn't intended to be drivable by players. However, with a really simple glitch, you could gain access and get to drive the anti-AA Wraith. So that was always a cool glitch that some people would try to show you on the level of the Covenant sometimes, or maybe on some other levels, but it was cool. It's a neat concept for a vehicle, and it served as the purpose for many objectives in the game's campaign. Then with the Brutes jumping into the forefront, story-wise, they had to add some new vehicles to go together with what the Brutes were using. So the Chopper was introduced, which likely evolved from that Brute cycle idea, and this thing was pretty cool. You could drive around and had one big wheel that would just tear stuff up, and a pretty awesome boost that could pull you ahead. Tie that to some good cannons that could shoot from a distance. This thing was pretty powerful, especially in the multiplayer side of things. Also, on the other hand, Brutes had the Brute Prowler, which was the replacement to the lovely Spectre. Unfortunately, this vehicle got rid of the boost that the Spectre had, but it still could fit 4 players in it. And another interesting thing is whoever's in the turret seat is surprisingly usually the safest person in the entire Prowler. If you get 4 people loaded up in a Prowler and you're playing Frogger and you're jumping and you get shot, everyone's likely to die with the exception of the person in that turret. He can usually take 1 or 2 extra hits than everyone else. Now, in general, there's not too much we actually can say about Halo 3 ODST other than specifically pointing out the Phantoms that we already don't get to fly, but we just wanted to note them. The Phantoms in ODST are slightly different as they have these little black carriers on the bottom of the ship that can be used to pick up the squid houses and drop them off in various places. So you do see them from time to time, and they are slightly different, and that's kind of cool. And also with Halo 3 ODST, we're still waiting for Rejected Shotgun to finally make an engineer with a saddle mod, so we can just jump on the engineers and ride them and do some energy sword jousting or something. Still waiting on that, Rejected. People let them know. I think it's an idea that's so stupid it needs to happen. When it comes to cut content from Halo Reach, there's a few things that never fully made its way into the final release of the game. There were different versions of drop pods originally shown off at the E3 2010 trailer that ended up getting replaced in the final release. There was a different version of what looks like a Halo Reach Revenant that seems to be more hovering like a Covenant type Warthog. And there were also plans to let you do things like drive a Scarab or also drive a big mobile fortress in one way or another. Those things would have been cool. Unfortunately, it didn't make its way into the final game. For Halo Reach's actual release though, we did see a reduction in some of the vehicles from previous titles, while the Banshee, the Ghost, and the Wraith all returned, and we also got the dropship, both the Phantom version and the Spirit. Those are all cool that those are back, though the Brute vehicles like the Chopper and the Prowler were removed from the game. We did get the Revenant, which was kind of like a faster 2-seated tank or Wraith that could drive around and shoot a lighter shot, but still was a powerful vehicle, though this came of course at the cost of us losing the awesome 4-seater vehicles from Halo 3 and Halo 2. We didn't get the Spectre or the Prowler this time, so it was just the worst of both worlds. We would also see some redesigns on the familiar vehicles that were brought back, like the Banshee, the Ghost, and the Wraith, this time all having a little bit of a darker tone to fit into that Reach aesthetic, and there were some interesting things like the Seraph, which was a counterpart to the Saber, and is drivable in the original version of Reach through some glitches, or you can just take it for a spin in Forge World nowadays in the MCC. There also were these Space Banshees, which were pretty cool. They're slightly different than regular Banshees. Also in Halo Reach, for the first time ever, you could officially fly a Phantom through the use of the Easter egg that's hidden on New Alexandria. It was pretty cool. After years and years of seeing these things flying around, getting to actually pilot one for the first time was an awesome experience. When it comes to vehicles that ended up getting cut out of Halo 4, there were multiple files from Halo Reach that kind of were just leftover files for what would become Halo 4. So if you look through the files hard enough, you can find info on the cut Revenant, some cut things like a Space Banshee, even a cut Scarab that apparently was at one point supposed to be drivable. And then in Halo 4, as far as the vehicles you can actually drive, we're limited to just the Wraith, the Ghost, and the Banshee. They did introduce a Lich that you can board and destroy, much like the Scarabs from earlier games. None of these we actually get to drive ourselves, but both the Scarab, the Lich, and the Kraken that comes up in Halo 5 were cool, just we never got to actually drive them. Halo 2 Anniversary was a really interesting game because it was this hybrid of Halo 4, like its engine, but kind of modded away to play exactly like Halo 2 did, or as closely as possible. And it's interesting because we did see some vehicles return, like the Ghost and the Banshee, of course, and they do play similarly to what you would expect here. Even the Wraith is in this one as well, and it boosts around pretty quickly. But I was incredibly disappointed that they made a remaster anniversary campaign from the Halo 4 engine, but they didn't put the effort in of putting the Halo 2 Spectre in the multiplayer side of things, because they'd have to make a brand new vehicle just to include it. And it was kind of disappointing because the Spectre was in the original Halo 2's multiplayer. It wasn't like a campaign only thing, and they just never included it in Halo 2 Anniversary. It was forgotten about. We did a whole petition to try to get them to bring the thing into Halo Infinite. That got like 8,500 signatures, and then it still was never added in Halo Infinite. Still, we need justice for that Spectre. One day we'll see the Spectre again, and it'll be glorious. Let's go ahead and take a look forward to Halo 5 Guardians. Now, this game, of course, brought back the mainstays that we've seen from throughout the years. We got our Ghost, except it's Halo 5ified. We got our Wraith, and it's also Halo 5ified, and also the Banshee is Halo 5ified. We did get to see the return of the AA Wraith, which was kind of interesting, but there weren't really too many things on the brand new front when it came to introducing brand new Covenant type vehicles to get to drive around in. In the firefight Warzone thing that they did, there was a grunt mech that you could fight, which was actually kind of cool. And later on in an update, they did add vehicle variants for the first time into Halo, kind of in this official manner, where the vehicles were different based on what color they were. So we got the Sword Ghost, which is this red version. We got Ghost Ultras, which were these silverish white colored ones. And we got Ghost Temples, which were these cool looking gold ones. Moving on to Halo Wars 1 and 2. Now, like we've said in the past, we're not super familiar with Halo Wars 1 and 2. It's just not our style of game that we like to immerse ourselves in the same regards. But we are interested in the lore, and Dim plays a lot of Halo Wars, so he was a little familiar with this to kind of help us out with this list. In Halo Wars 1, there was one new Covenant vehicle brought in that you can actually see, which is called the Locust, and it was like a little smaller version of the Scarab. And then there was a Vampire, which was like another flying vehicle, kind of like what a Seraph would have been like in Halo Reach, maybe. Halo Wars 2 was really cool. They introduced the Banished for the first time, which gave us some pretty cool vehicles like the Marauder, which is a tank that is designed kind of to be like an actual scorpion animal, like with the shape that it has. The Skitterer, which is like this Banished type vehicle. There also was the Reaver, which was this mech type vehicle. And then there were two air vehicles brought into the game, known as the Shroud and the Blisterback. There also was a vehicle known as a Methane Wagon, which I don't fully understand how that works, but it was listed on Halopedia, so we're gonna make sure we get some good footage of that and show it to you guys now. Going forward into Halo Infinite, there were some cut vehicles. A lot of things that were completely left over from Halo 5 Guardians were still accessible in the files with some modding in Halo Infinite, which is really interesting. However, there was one standout one that's worth noting, the Escharum Wraith, which could mean that at some point there was a section planned in the campaign where you would get to fight against him, maybe in a tank, or maybe it was just a multiplayer variant that was planned. But nonetheless, there was a special version of the Wraith that existed and is in the game files that we still don't know much about. Halo Infinite was interesting with it kind of being a soft reboot and a focus on Banished being the main faction. We get Covenant vehicles, except they're red now instead of purple, so we get to see the new Banshee, the new Ghost, and the new Wraith, and even the Chopper is brought back from Halo 3, except it's Banishified. Now, on top of that, in the campaign, there were some variants, like the Chopper having a special variant that later would be translated into Forge, and we're pretty confident that sometime in the future future, we will see more vehicles be brought into Halo Infinite, adding more variety and some different things as well. Just in general, the new banished phantoms looked quite a bit different, which were pretty cool here as well. We do wish, though, more of the sandbox existed in Halo Infinite. So now we wanted to turn it around to you guys. What did y'all think about this list? Did you enjoy these Covenant vehicles? Which is your favorite Covenant vehicle, and which do you feel like needs to come back? The Spectre. We want to give a huge shout out to our patrons once again. You guys have made these types of videos possible for us. If you guys want to become a patron, there's a link in the description down below where you can sign up, throw a couple dollars our way. It actually helps us out significantly, as a couple people throwing a few dollars becomes not so much of a few dollars, and it kind of can help us do things. So that's cool. Or if you want to get something in return, if you're going to be filling up on your gamer subs, you know, you're running low or something, just make sure you use code RocketSloth, because this stuff tastes great, and they give us a cut of every person who uses our discount code. So why not? Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time with a brand new video.